Welcome to our podcast, The Better You Are, The Better You Are. Whether it is physically, mentally, or spiritually, when you know better, you can do better. And when you do better, you'll be better. On this podcast, we share knowledge, expertise, opinions, and experiences. All things that can help you to change the game. By the time we're done, it's hard for you not to be encouraged. So join us. The better you are.
Our speakers today include Dr. Regina Adair. Dr. Adair is the Regional Medical Director for TeamHealth's OB-GYN Hospitalist Northeast and Indiana markets. She is also the Facility Medical Director for the Indiana University Ball Memorial OB-GYN Hospitalist Program. She has more than 20 years of experience in the field of obstetrics and gynecology. Next is Dr. Ann Matory. Dr. Matory is a neonatologist with 40 years of experience, having worked in neonatal intensive care units in Chicago, Atlanta, and now in Indianapolis. She is currently the medical director of the neonatal intensive care unit at Eskenazi Hospital in Indianapolis, Indiana, and is also a faculty attending physician at Riley Hospital Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. We also have Sierra Woods. Sierra is a postpartum registered nurse, international board certified lactation consultant, postpartum doula, and an Indiana certified community health worker. She is founder of the Melamama Maternal Wellness Program in Indianapolis, Indiana, focused on providing accessible lactation care for women of color and underserved communities. We also have Dr. Ann Osuntokun. Dr. Osuntokun is a pediatrician with 27 years experience. She is with Peyton Manning Children's Hospital and the Ascension Medical Group in Indiana and has been with them for the past 21 years. She takes care of children from birth to young adulthood at the age of 21. We also have Dr. Tamika Dawson. Dr. Dawson is a highly experienced family and sports medicine physician based in Indianapolis, Indiana. She also has some 20 years of experience and is a course director at the Indiana University School of Medicine. And I am Dr. Lauren Dungy-Poythress. I am a maternal-fetal medicine specialist, which means that I specialize in high-risk obstetrics, and I have decades of experience as well and have worked with different programs throughout my career, including here in Indiana, as well as other states. What I love about this panel is that it includes people and professions that I would reach out to in order to help care for women throughout a pregnancy. Okay, so we've talked about before pregnancy, we talked about during pregnancy, now we're going to talk about after pregnancy, which is also called the postpartum period. And there's an immediate postpartum period, which I'll say is anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, but then there's long term that we're also going to talk about that can go up to 17 to 20 years. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is you've delivered, and things went well prayerfully, and you have a newborn baby, and you take the baby home. And I'm going to start with my friend Sierra, my postpartum doula here, who, I remember my first baby, the baby slept most of the time that first 2 days in the hospital. Then I went home and the baby never slept. And so tell me, and I would also say that, educated woman delivering babies for multiple years before I had a baby, I didn't realize that with breastfeeding, would be breastfeeding about every 2 hours. I talked to a lot of different people, including the lactation consultant from my pediatrician. I got different advice from different people, and it was that 2 days when you take your baby home and come see your pediatrician in 2 days, the longest 2 days of my life. And so I was convinced my baby wasn't getting enough food. So I would like to first talk to you about what you do as a postpartum doula and how you might help through that breastfeeding issue. We're going to talk to Dr. Osuntokun about breastfeeding, Dr. Matory, and any thoughts you guys want to add about breastfeeding, but there's lots of stories to breastfeeding.
There are. So first I would say, with breastfeeding, you should really take a class on what breastfeeding is, what it looks like, how your body works, how milk is actually made. It gives you a better perspective on how to feed your baby when the milk starts coming in, because your body actually starts making milk at 16 weeks. But it's once the placenta is delivered, the baby is born, that is when your body goes into colostrum making and that's when you latch baby and your baby starts to get colostrum. But with breastfeeding, I always tell people there are no rules with breastfeeding. You do what works best for you. So if you find yourself really stressed out about making enough milk, I am not opposed to formula. It is okay. My first step is always contact your doctor, talk to them about if baby's making enough, because oftentimes we want to weigh baby to see, is baby growing? Is baby, catching up with the birth weight? And then contact your lactation consultant, and they can talk to you about like ways to make sure that your baby is getting enough.
That's great. And we did talk a little bit about colostrum. I'd like to talk about that, Dr. Matory. And there are some real good benefits to breastfeeding, and particularly even if it's just that one or first 2 days or whatever length of time afterwards. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, exactly. The colostrum is so crucial in terms of providing some antibodies for the baby to just get started with. And even though it looks like it's just a little bit, we encourage moms to pump. Oftentimes, my babies are going to be in the NICU, and so they're not able to go to breast, but we want that milk whenever we can start feedings for our preemies or any babies in the NICU. So we ask moms to start pumping. They work with their postpartum nurses early on to start pumping and send that milk to us. And so it may be just, 1 mil, just 2 mils, but we will use it in a syringe, in tubing that we can then provide for the baby, because it's so important with those first antibodies and the initial feeding for the baby.
So regardless of what gestational age you deliver at, that initial breast milk is very beneficial for the baby. Dr. Osuntokun, like I said, that was the longest 2 days of my life. And I was like, I don't know. And somebody said to me, if your baby's crying that much, there's something wrong. This was a medical person who said that to me, because I was feeding. She would wake up every 2 hours, and I think she was about 6'3" when she was born. So she was a smaller baby with a smaller stomach. I finally I Googled some stuff, told my husband, you meet me, he coming home from work. I had her ready. We went to the library. That was my 15 minutes I used that day to run to the library and get some books. and I read, and that's when I learned myself, as Sierra says, it can be different for everybody. So how do you counsel patients and help relieve anxious moms like I was when that first 2 or 3 days of home with your baby?
Yeah, breastfeeding can be challenging, and as we've just heard from both of our presenters here, that breastfeeding is considered. I consider it is something that you have to decide that you want to do at the beginning, and you can always change your mind. The formulas now are made in such a way that they simulate breast milk. They are almost, I won't say identical, but they are close to breast milk than they had been in the couple of years past. So it's always advantageous to ask yourself, this is something I want to do, but at the same time, tell yourself, if it's not possible, I have a default. In addition to formula, there are breast milk banks that they have in the state of Indiana that you can consult. And these breast milk banks will have moms that have been very generous, moms that have been very lucky to be able to produce a lot of milk, and they've donated their milk free of charge. And these are banks you can attend to pick up breast milk if you decide that that's what you want to do. But how I encourage the mom in the office is I usually explain to her that the first few days is just the beginning. You're going to have small amounts of milk. It's the colostrum. It's that very rich, thick amount that provides antibodies. It provides proteins and fat that is very rich. But eventually you get the breast milk coming out itself. Most of the moms that I see are very anxious. My child is not peed. He is peed only 1 or 2 times. And we do expect that. We do expect that it will be a little bit less than what it is eventually going to be. But as long as your child is latching on, they are sucking, and at the same time you are offering the breast milk every 2 to 3 hours. Most of the time we will have the wet diapers, we will have the poopy diapers. The wet diapers initially start very low, and then they start to get more as you start to get more as you do more breastfeeding. And the stool also transitions from that dark, tarry stool. It may become green, a little greeny brown, and then eventually it becomes that seedy mustard seed that we talk about, that yellow mustard seed. So as long as we are going through the transition of the peeing and pooping and having those stools being transitioned to a different color, I always encourage a mom that it is a process. It may be a little slower than you expect, but it's something that takes a few days. We will usually see a baby day 2, day 3. And what we are looking for is we're looking at the weight. We want to make sure that the child is either not losing too much weight, because we consider 10% quite a number for us, but we want you can lose a couple of ounces in your first 2 weeks of life. And that's one of the encouragements that I try to tell moms, that we've looked at the scale. Your baby weighed 7 pounds at birth. Now he is 6 pounds, 8 ounces. That is something that we expect.
Okay.
The baby loses a bit of water weight when they're born. You lose a bit of the water weight, which is a natural thing that happens. But as long as we're not losing too much of the weight, we are okay. So I usually will have them sit down. I will ask her, what is your support system? Most of the time there's dad is in the room and he's there, and he's, dad can also help as well. When you, in those 2 to 3 hours, you go into a room, you put your feet up, you give dad your baby, because your baby's still going to know you for the next 21 years. Right? So give daddy baby, let daddy bond. You go and put your feet up. You can watch comedy. You can listen to music. You can read a book or listen to a podcast. Just do something that you enjoy. Drink a lot of water. We talk about the 64 ounces, 8 times 8. Make sure that you are relaxed. Make sure that you're eating healthy. Get that little rest you can. Those are all parts of breast milk that allow you to produce milk. The more you rest, the more you sleep, the more you're relaxed, the more you are in tune to just giving yourself that nourishment, you will produce milk better. It's not 100%. We have women that are challenged with nipples. We have women that don't have any milk production. The milk production is not a lot. We have women that can't breastfeed because they are on medication that they have to go back on. So I try and explain to moms that there are always options. Breast milk is the best. We know for the first 6 months of life, we do recommend sole breastfeeding. If you can go to a year, great. If you can go beyond a year, that's even greater. But breast milk can be attained from the breast milk banks. We can also get formula. All the formulas now are wonderful formulas that have been studied, and they're actually really, really good nutrition in them as well.
And that's good to know. You're not a failure if you don't breastfeed. It's okay.
And I want to add too, I think about home visits. So when I go to new moms' homes, many times they don't have the support that they're looking for because maybe their mom didn't breastfeed. So their mom can't support them in that way to know, this is what you should be looking for when you're breastfeeding your baby. So oftentimes I'm educating their parent as well as them on what that looks like. So what I'm looking for is, like she said, diapers. How many diapers has baby had within the past 24 hours? How do your breasts feel after you get done breastfeeding? Do your breasts still feel really full and heavy? Then 9 times out of 10, maybe your baby didn't get enough. Did your baby wake up 10 minutes after laying them down because maybe they're still they're doing they're still moving their head looking for more. So those are the things I'm looking for too. And I'm also asking, just as you said, about what the diapers look like. What color is the baby's poop? That always tells me if their baby is getting enough, if the milk is maturing. And I'm also looking at, what does the milk look like? What color is the milk that actually is coming out? Is it yellow? Is it starting to turn more white now? So those are things I look for.
I was just going to also add that we also have resources, and most of the major hospitals in the communities will have lactation nurses that can help. Mm-hmm. And what the lactation nurses do is they support. They teach how to hold. They teach how to to latch. They watch the weight. They also help you in encouraging you. And then you have support groups with other women that are in those groups as well. And I think when you have a lot of other moms in a position where they're also experiencing what you are experiencing, you actually feel better that I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I will always say, you have the choice if you want to see a lactation nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I can write the consult for you at this visit. And some of the moms will say, I think I've got this, especially the seasoned moms. The younger moms and the moms that are breastfeeding for the first time, they're ready to grab that paper from you as fast as they can. And they're like, yeah, I'll go for that breastfeeding lactation consult. And I think that's one thing that we should remember, that we have that option as well in the hospitals, that it's available and it's also taken care of by your insurances.
Yep. And I also like your point about getting enough rest and drinking fluids. It's important to know that, as you point out, or several people point out, there's sometimes medications that a patient has to be on that don't necessarily allow you to breastfeed. And there you can work with your pediatrician and your whatever specialist who's managing your condition to try and optimize that. But sometimes it's just not an option for your health. But also people with, for example, seizures disorders, to be awake every 2 hours and not get enough sleep can increase your risk for having seizures. And so there's sometimes, for the best health of you and your baby, we've got to modify the plan a little bit. And it's good to know that there's lots of options out there.
And I was going to say too, there's no rules with breastfeeding. So you do what works best for you and your baby. Like, that's just it. So I have moms that I consult and they might only breastfeed twice a day. Like, that's okay. Or they might decide to pump and say, okay, my goal today is to make sure my baby gets 3 bottles of breast milk today. That's fine. Like, it's still good. No breast milk is bad for your baby.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, similar to what we've said about knowing your body as the mom and the adult, you're getting to know your baby every day. And each day you'll see something that tells you, this is what my baby does. This is what my baby likes. And on those days then when the baby doesn't have as many diapers as they had previously, we talk about maybe 6 in a day, but they've only had a couple, or if the baby isn't waking up to eat and to feed every 2 to 3 hours, you have to start to think, well, this isn't normal. Something's going on with my baby. And so I just always try to encourage moms, as they're being discharged, to make sure they start to get to know their baby and appreciate the fact that they are getting to know their baby. The other thing that happens with our preemies who go home, and I'll just add this, sometimes moms have not been able to make enough milk at that point, and so we supplement with formula. And as you point out, there are formulas now that will cover every nutritional need that exists practically, and so that can supplement breast milk, and then dad can give the bottle, mom can breastfeed, whatever works for that particular family.
That's great. Well, we talked a little bit about sometimes you get preeclampsia or gestational diabetes and complications in pregnancy. We want to follow up on that after delivery. And Dr. Adair, can you talk about what is a typical follow-up for somebody who had an early delivery, severe disease of preeclampsia, and how that might differ from somebody who had a normal pregnancy?
So normal postpartum follow-up is usually 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what. If you have a vaginal delivery, we usually say 6 weeks postpartum. And for a C-section, can typically be 2 weeks for your incision check, just to make sure your C-section scar is healing well, and then 6 to 8 weeks after that. For someone with, let's say, preeclampsia, who you're concerned that they may have blood pressure issues. So typically diseases related to pregnancy last about 6 to 8 weeks after. About 6 to 8 weeks after your delivery is when your hormones start to go back to your pre-pregnancy hormones. And it's then that you would transition their care to your primary care doctor or whomever. But for someone who's preeclamptic, we normally discharge them and say, hey, we want you to come back in a couple days and have a blood pressure check. We just want to make sure that everything is status quo and everybody's doing well. And we may even send them home on blood pressure medicine. And if their blood pressures require medication, then their follow-up will be even more frequent, maybe coming every week for the first couple weeks or so. And then if you see that their blood pressures are well controlled on the regimen that you have them on, then we titrate it down or decrease their dosages until their blood pressures are normalized or they really don't require it. But we also absolutely 100% recommend that at your 6 weeks when you're released from us from postpartum, that they follow up their primary care physician, because ultimately those patients are at increased risk of having some sort of issue after pregnancy.
And that's great. And I think it's also important to note that even patients who maybe didn't have a complication of pregnancy, you're still at risk of developing preeclampsia after you deliver when nothing seemed to be a problem. Maybe your blood pressure, whose blood pressure doesn't go up a little bit in labor when you're in pain and pushing. And so it's important when you feel those same symptoms we talked about, headache, blurred vision, pain, at the top of your abdomen or stomach over your liver area, all those complications, risk factors, or you just don't feel right, still talk to your doctor because you're at risk for developing preeclampsia or even eclampsia where you seize even after you deliver, even though thankfully the majority do better.
A lot of times people present with preeclampsia after delivery. They might have had like borderline blood pressures, maybe like 130s over 80s in labor, really weren't symptomatic, but once they go home, they end up having symptoms and signs. And so we sometimes have to admit patients after they've been home a week or so for treatment for preeclampsia. The farther away you get from your delivery, the less likely that is, but just know that up to 6 weeks postpartum, you still are at risk of having preeclampsia or eclampsia.
And then as Dr. Adair says, there's increased risk for hypertensive complications later on in life. And Dr. Dawson, then we're going to say you need to go back and see a primary care doctor, whoever who's managing might be a cardiologist, might be an internal medicine doctor, but you need to see somebody on a regular basis. What are some of those the things that you would monitor for and concerns that are associated with those patients who have the risk factor of having had a hypertensive complication of pregnancy?
I think the biggest thing is after 6 to 8 weeks, you're coming back to me because now I'm managing your hypertension. You are no longer preeclamptic. You've left that stage and now you have hypertension. And what we'll do is we will adjust meds based off diet, exercise, what your blood pressure is starting to look like. Because as you start to adjust your health, that blood pressure may start to go down a little bit. I always tell patients, a lot of times you think, I need to be at my ideal weight to get off blood pressure medicine. That's not always true. Normally we say 10 pounds. You lose 10 pounds. You've decreased your rate, your risk by like 20%. So 10 pounds, because astronomical, you're like, I got to lose 100 pounds. Well, what does that sound like? That sounds impossible to most people. But if I say 10 pounds, you're like, I could do that. I could adjust my diet. I could work out a little bit more for that. And so I try to get them on a better regimen. What are you eating? How are you sleeping? But more importantly, we have to take our medication until your blood pressure stabilizes and we see where you're going to go. The other thing is diabetes. You had gestational diabetes, but now will you become a diabetic? You see your OB up until 6 to 8 weeks and you're doing okay, but your sugars are still running a little high. And after 3 months, I check a hemoglobin A1C and it's above 6.5. You are now a diabetic. You have left gestational diabetes and now you are a diabetic. So what are we going to do about that? We're going to change your diet. We're going to start medicines and see how you go from there. And so I think the biggest thing is just making sure there's a good transition of care from the OB to you as a primary care doctor. And the biggest thing I tell all my patients is you got to be comfortable with your OB and what they're telling you. You also have to be comfortable with what I'm going to tell you, because once we've left that area, we're going to start working on some of these other things.
And I think it's important to note that it might not be that first year. It might be 2 years later. It might be 10 years later. You're at increased risk for diabetes later in life. If you had gestational diabetes in pregnancy, you're at increased risk for hypertensive complications, cardiovascular disease, and even heart attacks and strokes later on. It could be 17 to 20 years later if you had a hypertensive complication of pregnancy. So you need to see a doctor regularly on at least an annual or every year basis to monitor for that things. We don't know if there's some something that changed in your body related to you having preeclampsia or something that was just revealed. And so it shows us that you're the one who's at increased risk for having that. It's sort of, pregnancy sometimes is considered a stress test for life. And so it's going to reveal what that treadmill test is going to tell us about your heart later on. And so if you hear nothing else, if you have a gestational diabetes or hypertensive complication of pregnancy, see a doctor on a regular basis so that you can be around for a long time to take care of your babies and enjoy your friends and family.
And there's some legislation out there currently about expanding the postpartum period. Right now, women are granted for vaginal delivery 6 weeks and 8 weeks for a C-section. But studies have shown that the true postpartum period lasts for at least a year, and that women need closer follow-up, more frequent follow-up, and resources, not only from the medical perspective, but financially, that aren't provided. And so there's legislation out there advocating for the extension of the postpartum period to be 12 months.
Exactly. In a lot of states, and I believe Indiana has adopted that. And so that's great. And that, even as you pointed out, Dr. Adair, not everybody necessarily, they might only have coverage during pregnancy that can be retroactive. Well, Medicaid has expanded it to a year. So if you need some baseline studies or evaluation for cardiac and hypertensive disease, make sure you get in and see a doctor after that. Money prayerfully will not be an issue for you or insurance coverage for that. Any other comments that anybody wants to add related to that?
I would just say, just my personal experience as an OBGYN, people expect us to know what to expect after having a baby. And I just remember my first, with my oldest daughter, our first visit to the pediatrician. I woke up 4 hours prior to her appointment to get her ready and was still an hour and a half late. So give yourself some grace. It's new to you too, just like it was new to me. And people would expect that I would be an expert. No, I've never been a mom. I just take care of moms. Yeah. And also, you gotta get some rest.
Yes.
I thought I had a stroke. I was like, I need a CT scan. That's where they scan your head to make sure you didn't have some type of stroke or something, because I can't remember my last name. It was that bad. And so moms need to rest and do your best to rest when the baby rests.
Indeed. And that's why it's important as well. I always say, if you have, for family members and husbands and spouses or partners, what can I do? Well, just be there to help. Maybe cook a meal, or not. Everybody knows I don't cook, but anyway. But for, some people aren't as blessed as I am. They might be a single parent. They might be, have parents that are elderly that they have to take care of. So it's easy for us to say, get some sleep, get some rest, but maybe there's people or resources out there that can help you, because it's not, I was ignorant too. It's not simple.
Yeah. I want to add one tip that I often tell new moms is, you get home, you want to do everything. You want to wash the dishes, you want to do the laundry. Instead, create a list of your to-do. And when people come over to come help you or to come see the baby, because they want to see the baby, ask them to do something on your to-do list. So that helps you to say, okay, I can actually relax because, my friend's coming over today to hold the baby, but also, hey, can you throw those clothes in the laundry for me? Like, that will help me out a lot.
And just piggybacking on what you just said, another thing I try and tell moms is that, you really do need the sleep, because the sleep is going to increase your milk production if you're breastfeeding. So what you can do is you can pump, your milk and have dad do that night feed. That does help moms a lot. If dad can do the 10 o'clock feed, or even if it's just because he can still get his 8-7 hours before going to work. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight feed, so that you can go to bed around 9 and you end up waking up at 3. So you have about a 6-hour break where you can actually get that length of sleep. That may be helpful for moms as well. I think that is a very big thing for moms that are feeding babies, even if it's bottle feeding as well, is that nighttime feed when you have to wake up. So if one of those hours are taken away from you so you can get the 6-hour stretch, that does make a huge difference in your demeanor. When you wake up, you're a little happier. You're ready to smile a little bit more. And that's a great idea that you just mentioned, that you should have lists so friends can do that for you. Another thing is when people ask you that, what can I gift you for the baby? Or like 2 strollers, maybe you can give me a cleaner. Give me an hour, give me a certificate for the cleaning lady, so that you can use the cleaning lady to do your cleaning for you those first few weeks of postpartum. And that is a nice way of just, that's a great gift. I think that works out really well.
For food too.
Or gift cards.
Gift cards for food.
Those are good things you can ask for, because a lot of people want to buy, the stroller. They want to buy you the car seat, but you may get multiple people that want to do that. And you can just say, why don't I'll just have you do the cleaning lady, just 1 visit, 2 visits. That will be helpful. Or as you just said, helping them out with other things that may be helpful as well, food.
And that's one, before we get off of our subject about postpartum, I just wanted to make sure that we understand this is also a time for moms to talk about their contraceptive method.
Okay.
Yes.
That this is it should start prior to.
You've done it, during the
It should start prior to. It should start prior to your delivery, because you're most fertile right after you have a baby. So believe me, there are people that show up in the office at their 6-week appointment pregnant again, right? And so people think if I breastfeed, I can't get pregnant. Nope, that isn't always the case. The medicines that we give you to not decrease your breast milk for contraception can increase your risk of getting pregnant. So we have to alter some of your medications to prevent pregnancy, but those are the times that you need to be thinking about it. And when you come to your doctor for your postpartum visit is when you address what methods of contraception you want to pursue.
The one thing I wanted to jump back to, which I missed the opportunity to talk about, Dr. Adair talked about taking her baby to the pediatrician the first time. And Dr. Osuntokun, can you tell us how do you choose a pediatrician, and what are some factors that might go into that? And is there availability to meet with a pediatrician before you ever have the baby to see how, if you might like that person? Or
it's very important that you start thinking about your pediatrician. Most of the time, we will recommend 6 months when you're pregnant. By 6 months of your pregnancy, it's time to start thinking, who am I going to see long term? Most of the pediatricians offer visits, meaning that we call them meet and greet visits, where you meet the doctor, you ask questions, and you find out more about the office. They can be done in person or they can be done virtually. I always recommend try and come in person because you want to know the drive time. You also want to know, is the office up to your standard when it comes to cleanliness? Are the staff friendly at the front desk? Did they make eye contact with you? So in person is always recommended. And the reason why we want to do it early is because pediatricians are filling up. And also you don't want to be like 8.5 months pregnant, in the snow, driving to some office and finding out that, this office is not the office you want and you have to visit somewhere else. The biggest thing, which I think we've all been talking about, is comfort. Comfort with your doctor, comfort with the office, comfort with the staff. Trusting is another thing. You want to make sure your values align. Some of the values will be breastfeeding is one of them. Another one is vaccinations. And you also want to make sure that you are all singing the same tune when it comes to, circumcision. These are things that, you would discuss with your doctor. Another thing I always tell parents is to make sure it's not too far, because you don't want to be driving 45 minutes. So what are the traffic how will I get there? Is it going to be something easy for me to get there? Do they offer visits that are they same day visits? Is there same day appointments that you guys offer? How do you handle your nighttime? Is there somebody I can talk to at 2:00 in the morning if my baby refuses to sleep or has a fever? Most of us have 24 hours coverage, just like OBGYNs. We have the 24-hour coverage. Somebody will answer you back and call you back and give you some advice. You want to make sure insurance is on their plan, especially people that have commercial insurance. You want to make sure you're not paying out of network. So you make sure that that person that you decide to visit or become your pediatrician is in your network. You have to remember the first year of life, you will have 8 scheduled visits with your pediatrician. These are not unscheduled. These are scheduled, meaning that we will see you 2-3 days after. We will see you at the 2-week visit, the 4-week visit, the 2-month, 4-month, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month. That's 9 visits that are unscheduled. So if you are with a person you don't feel comfortable with, that is not a good thing. So the first thing is I meet with you. I feel that you hear me. I think that you listened to me. I had questions. You answered them right. I felt comfortable with the office. I felt comfortable with this office staff. That is where you will want to be. Now, you remember very well that it's not a concrete thing, meaning that if you do 2 or 3 visits and you're like, oh, I got the wrong impression when I first of all visited this office, you can change. So, but it's always nice to start somewhere. And when you start there, because as we know, most of these illnesses will be picked up pretty early. We are going to be picking up sicknesses that may be early under the age of 4 weeks. It's very important to address them. And the breastfeeding also has to be established, as well as the jaundice that we will see after birth. Earlier is always better. That's the take home from this. The earlier you pick up somebody, the more comfortable you will have an easier pregnancy, because you're like, I put my doctor in my pocket. I've got a pediatrician. I don't have to do that. That's one thing, check. That makes it easier for all of us as well.
Do you have any comments, Dr. Matory? You have a little bit different population.
Of course, in the hospital, because I'm strictly hospital-based. But I did think about one other thing in terms of the pediatrician and the outpatient and follow-ups. Oftentimes, you're going to have a second baby, right? So if you have a pediatrician that you're really comfortable with, once again, check that off your list. When you get pregnant the next time, you know who your pediatrician is going to be. And it's great to have that continuity, because then that office knows knows the first baby, will know that second baby. And, sometimes we have families who've had a baby who's being seen in a clinic over there and another clinic over there and another clinic over there. And we try to encourage them to think about having them all go to the same pediatrician, same office, because of continuity. But in general, once again, getting to know your baby right after birth, in the hospital, then after discharge, family getting to know that baby through that same continuum, I think is so important for the family unit. And just can't stress enough that that's how we get started on a good life, with just getting to know our family and knowing our babies.
Yeah, and as you said, it's also nice to just use family members as your reference, friends, colleagues, and people that can say that was my pediatrician, or my kids go to this person. I've been very fortunate to now be the next generation of kids. That just ages me, right? So now I'm taking care of the kids' kids.
Yeah.
So that, and you're right, the continuity is very important. Some places, some people don't have that kind of luxury in the sense that they may be moving a lot, but if they do, it's always nice to stay with the same person if you like that person, so you have the continuity of care. And we also have the privilege of knowing diseases that run in the family. So if one sibling has eczema, Johnny had eczema when he was 2 months, I remember him. Or if there's food allergies, those are things that run in families that we are able to pick up. Asthma is another one, especially when we deal with children of color. We have a lot of asthma, allergies of food allergies, and eczema. So we are able to say this is something that we've seen in your other 2 children, or your child that you had before.
Along those lines also, when we discharge high-risk babies, we try to call the pediatrician's office to give them handover and changeover in terms of what to expect, what the care has been. And it's always so wonderful when the pediatrician says, oh yeah, I know the family. I already know, I'm taking care of the older child, and they do have this as an issue in their family. So we'll be looking for that, so.
Well, Dr. Osuntokun, I know you also mentioned you see these moms or a parent and that baby on a very regular scheduled visit. You often see them before a routine OB follow-up visit. Postpartum depression is something that, or just even just moody, baby blues or whatever you want to call it, but even more serious concerns with postpartum depression are concerns that are related to pregnancy. And is that something you all screen for when you see patients, a mom who comes in with her newborn?
We have screening tools that we offer, and you remember very well, we are not mom's primary care. So it's, we can offer it to you and say, fill out these forms. There's a couple, there's the Edinburgh one, and there's another one that's the PHQ-2. And if the PHQ-2 shows that there's some anxiety and depression, mainly depression, then we give you the PHQ-9.
So these are questionnaires that patients fill out?
These are questionnaires that are, that the tools that we can give parents to, or moms to fill out. So that's one of the ways we can know. Another way I usually would do is I would go through mom's record, because we get the record of the baby from the NICU, if it's a NICU baby, or from the OB. And I just look and see, what's mom on? If I see mom's on a couple of antidepressants, I say to myself, this is a bit of a risk, because we know that postpartum depression is usually seen in people that have had a previous history of depression. That's number one. But anybody can have postpartum depression. That would be a red flag for me as well. The postpartum blues is just something that's very temporary. It's the first few weeks of having your baby. You feel anxious. You feel, am I adequate? Can I do this? I feel, I just feel that I'm way ahead. I'm way above my league here. Those are things that will eventually dissipate, or they go down. The reason they go down is all this hormonal imbalance that we have with pregnancy. Your hormones are all over the place. And once you have the baby, these hormones start to change and they start to decrease. And the decrease can also cause mood issues as well. Now, when we go from baby blues, which is just, that light kind of feeling of inadequacy, you move on to the next step, which is postpartum depression, which is actually a little bit more I'll use the word, more serious than just postpartum blues. And this is when the mother feels, not only does she feel anxious, she feels inadequate, she feels shameful. She feels, this baby of mine, maybe I don't really like this baby. I don't really know if I really want to be a mom. She may feel that I am just sad all the time. And these thoughts, they're not just temporary. They start to, dig in. They start to last a little longer. And when that happens, we know the mom needs help. And we as pediatricians, if I at any point in time feel that the mother is suffering from postpartum depression from either her questionnaire or her demeanor or the way she is talking to me, I will ask cue words like, oh, how are you doing, Mrs. Johnson? I'm good. How's you, do you have help at home? Is grandma around? How's grandma doing? It's just me. Then, you start digging a little bit more, do you have any help? Is anybody coming to the home? How do you take care of your child? Do you have any resource that you use? That's how I try and use the detective work, which is more of just being more loving. And I have my staff as well. My staff are very aware of, Mom, Mrs. Johnson doesn't really look good. She held the baby was flopping. Or when I was taking the weight, I noticed that she was on her phone. Those are things that will give us red flags that I will just spend a little bit more time asking questions and then finding out if I do believe there's something going on. I would say to her, hey, who's your OB, by the way? And I do know that OB because I'll see it in the paper, but just to show that I'm interested in knowing more. And then I will say, sometimes we've actually called the office and say, do you want to check on Mrs. Johnson here because we've noticed some things in the office. And a lot of times I would hear things like, oh, yeah, we know, or some of the doctors are already in tune to that. But I think having your ears ready to listen and having your antennas on that you can actually pick up things is what I would say, in addition to offering questionnaires that may be or may not be answered.
And I think that's important. Were you going to say something, Sierra?
Yeah, so with postpartum depression, they're actually on Postpartum Support International website. There are virtual support groups that moms can join just to meet with other people who are dealing with the same things that they're dealing with. You never know that you need. I feel like sometimes you don't know that you need someone until you're in that moment, and then you meet other people that have also dealt with it. And then you don't feel alone anymore. And then it becomes more normalized.
And I imagine in the NICU, sometimes there's situations you might feel guilty, you might feel angry. I've got a baby that didn't come when I expected to, and this is not how I expected things to go.
Exactly. And so we use actually psychologists on a unit to work with moms and dads because we sense that and we know that that's not unexpected. Once again, it's not what you planned, right? Mm-hmm. Your baby you were going to be pregnant 9 months. You were going to take your baby home, round face, everything perfect. And now you have this little tiny one in an isolate, in an incubator, who you can touch sometimes, hold sometimes, but it's certainly not what you expected. And so we will see moms sit in the room maybe and just kind of stare at the floor or stare at the wall or have minimal contact and interaction with us. And then, of course, we have others who are very engaged and participate on rounds with us, have good questions, and want all the answers immediately, and they want the solutions right away. And so then we spend lots of times with those families, parents, grandparents, helping them to understand where we are at this point, where the baby is at this point, and what our goals are for the baby, what we expect to be the outcomes. But we do use psychology because we see, and it's not a surprise, right? No. When you mentioned it just about our personal experiences, so my baby, the one that was 36 weeks, we went home in a couple days, and she cried all the time. And I was trying to breastfeed, and like you say, I was a neonatologist, so I could breastfeed. That's, what is it? She didn't seem to want to breastfeed. She cried, I cried, and I finally decided she didn't like me. What did help? My mom was there with me, my husband, and so everybody was reassuring me that this is okay, we'll get through it, and we did. But you have those periods right after, as you described, the baby blues, postpartum blues, where just things aren't what you expected, and you want to make them just better immediately, and that's not the case. So any support, any resources that are available are welcomed. And I think what's important is to make sure that moms in particular realize that this is okay. It's not anything wrong with you. And so in hindsight, I can look back and still see myself crying, holding a baby that was crying, but it was okay. We got through it. And I wasn't alone in those feelings.
I think that's so important in pregnancy, outside of pregnancy. I'm not the only one who feels like this. This is not that outstanding or unusual. It's normal. This wasn't what I expected. I'm tired. I don't feel good. But to know, yeah, that happened to me or that happened to you. This is not abnormal to have people to help you. I think with depression of any diagnosis or, relative to pregnancy or not, to know, yeah, it's okay to feel down a little time. This is not, you are not odd or abnormal. And so I think, thank you for sharing that.
But talk about it, Yeah. And then accept help.
Yeah. Amen. And even if whatever help it is, it's not, if you had high blood pressure, you'd go get a antihypertensive, you get diabetes, you change your diet and everything, or you take some medicine. There's no shame in saying, I don't feel good. I don't feel like my mind is right. I think I'm depressed, or I'm seriously depressed. I want some help. We have pediatricians who you can go speak to, family practice doctors you can go speak to, doulas who you can reach out to. If you're in the NICU, you can reach out to the neonatologist or any of the providers there, and they have special help for you. And you can say it to your obstetrician or your family members or whatever. So it's important to know, reach out for help. They're there to help you. Okay, and we've talked about before, during, and after pregnancy, and I think we've covered a lot of factors. We certainly haven't covered everything, but the better you are, the better you are. Start where you are on the way to where you're going, and we hope that this has been helpful for everybody.
Thank you for listening in today. Weren't you inspired, encouraged, and uplifted? We hope so, because we're praying the best for you. Join us again next time for more betterment, because the better you are, the better you are.